Let's build a link shortener app using SvelteKit and one of the most beautiful headless CMSs I have ever seen. What's up, everyone? My name is James Q. Quick, and I do weekly videos about web development related topics. And I love using JavaScript and fun frameworks like Svelte and SvelteKit. Especially, I've done a lot with SvelteKit. And I love experimenting with different headless CMSs. It's very popular to use a headless CMS to store all your data in a way that developers and non-developers can access and update and have control over, and then pull that data into an application where developers can write all the functionality and things that they need on top of that. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We are specifically going to use Directus.io, which is the sponsor of this video. So I want to tell you a little bit about them before we get started, and then we'll go ahead and build out this application. So Directus, they have a tagline of power any project with a modern open source data platform. So the general idea of a headless CMS definitely applies here, but they have some cool features on top of everything that you would expect from a headless CMS. So one, it's really, really beautiful. You can look at this video and kind of let this play through and see just how beautiful it is, but it's awesome. So the UI is great. It's got an SDK that we'll see in JavaScript here in a second. And another thing is you can use this on top of any SQL database that you have. So if you want to use this as just a layer on top of your SQL database that then provides you with a REST API and then GraphQL, you can do that, which is really cool. You can also deploy this anywhere that you want, and we're going to use kind of the built-in cloud provider that they have for our project. So let's go ahead and get started here. We'll do create a free project, so you can end up signing up for free with your GitHub account. So it will take me to my projects page since I've already got one created, and I'm going to create a new project. And in this one, we're going to call this link shortener. I like to prefix all of my things with JQQ. And then we'll do the community cloud here. So this is going to be a free version of this deployed instance of Directus. And then we will choose an empty project. So we'll just start completely from scratch and go ahead and create this thing. Now let's talk a little bit about the data that we'll need for this. So in a link shortener app, you're going to need whatever the slug is. So if you have like your domain / and then podcast, for example, that would redirect to my compressed FM podcast. So if the slug is podcast, then the full URL would be compressed.fm. And those are the two main things that we need. We need the slug, and then we need the full URL. Now we also want to keep track of how many times a link has been clicked. So we'll have a clicks property. And then additionally, just for fun, if you are familiar with UTM parameters that you can include as query parameters inside of a URL, that's often used for tracking impact. So often when I do sponsored videos, I'll have UTM parameters and links so that the sponsor can see how many clicks came from the campaign that we are involved with. So it's just kind of little bits of tracking information that you can include in the URL to know where traffic is coming from. So we'll add a few different additional parameters for that. And you can see if we go into Bitly, if we click on creating a new link, this is my actual Bitly dashboard. Haven't used it in a while, but you can see that it's got the full URL. So I might do something like this. There's my website, and then it'll generate a slug for me, which we will customize this ourselves. Then you can see it's got UTM params for source, medium, and campaign. So we're just going to give the person the option to include those as well in each link that they create. All right, so this project has now been fully deployed, and we can go ahead and visit this. And this is going to be at a subdomain of Directus. So if we go ahead and open this project, it's going to take us to this kind of app id.directus.app/admin/login. Now, behind the scenes, what they did is they sent me an email with the admin credentials for this account. So it's to my email address that I signed up with, and then went ahead and created a password for me. So I'm going to go ahead and enter this information inside of here and paste in that password that they gave me. And LastPass is going to ask me if I want to save these credentials. Yes. Actually, I want to add a new account and go ahead and add this as a second one. So here's the Directus dashboard. And inside of here, we can go ahead and create a collection. So our collection is going to be our short link. So that's the name of the items that we want to store. So inside of here, we'll give this name short_link. And we'll have primary key is auto incremented integer. That's fine. And then we'll go ahead and create this thing. They also give us a few like built-in things that we can add. So we can add like date created, who created it, which user, date updated, and then user updated. So we can just add these and then add the ability to have sort as well. So we'll go ahead and check mark on this. That'll create our collection. And now we can go in and add our custom properties. And again, I just want to call out this dashboard is about as beautiful as any other dashboard that I've ever seen. So let's create another field. So our base field will be our URL. Actually, we'll start with our slug. So this is just going to be a regular text input. Notice all the different components that they have that we can use. So we'll choose this as an input. We'll say it's going to be a type of string, and then this is going to be the slug. So this is going to be the short part of the URL that we use to then redirect to. We're going to say this is required to have a value, and then this will be the short part of the URL, for example. You can also do icons with each of these just to kind of see them visually, which is nice. And then we'll go ahead and save this field. So that should be good. Now, next up is the actual URL. So let's create the URL. It's going to be another input. We'll say the key is URL, type string. Required, this is also a required parameter. And then let's save this. And we'll go in and edit this to add a little bit of validation. So we want to make sure in this URL that the field is actually valid. So we'll come down to validation. And there's no configured rules yet. So we'll add a filter. And we'll say that URL, and we'll use a regex. So in this case, we can just paste in regular expressions, and they will take care of the check to make sure that this input from the user actually matches that regex. So I think that I have a page open on here. I'm just going to copy in a regex from Stack Overflow. If you have one that works for you, fine. If you're comfortable just pasting this in, do that as well. But it's just a way for us to quickly add some validation. So I can say in here, my regex is going to be that thing, and just paste it in. And now we can have a validation message as well. So please enter a valid URL. So I really like that they've got validation built in here. That's really nice. So we'll go ahead and create that, and that will be good. Now the next thing we want is another input, and this will be a type of integer. And so this will be clicks. And then we'll have a default value of 0. So we don't necessarily have to have it be required because it'll be created on 0. We can also set a minimum value in here, a maximum value. Maximum is kind of anything. Step interval is 1. And this will be the number of times this link was clicked. Cool. So another cool thing about Directus is you have, like, it functions as a Headless CMS, but you have lots of customization inside of the dashboard as well. So you can play around with those things also. So the last couple things we'll do is add our UTM parameter. So we'll have UTM source. This won't be required. So we'll have UTM source, then we'll have UTM medium and UTM campaign. Again, if you're wanting to use those properties for tracking. So UTM medium is the next one. It'll be a string, not required. And then UTM campaign is the last one. So we'll come in and add UTM campaign, and all of that should be good. So those are all the properties that we need for now, at least in this demo. If you have more that you want to add, feel free to do that. So you can also kind of reorder these and kind of see in what order they're going to be. So you can, in terms of the form when you create stuff, which is kind of cool. So we can see the slug and the URL and then clicks and then UTM stuff. We can also kind of resize these. So we can tell this to be half width, and we can tell UTM source and then UTM medium, for example, to both be half width, and then drag UTM medium over here, and then drag up the campaign if we think that's longer. So anyway, these are, I think, really cool because you get full customization over all this stuff, and it's saving automatically for us. Cool. So now we can go ahead and create a piece of content. So a short link. So inside of here, I'm going to have mentioned this earlier. So Compressed is the podcast that I work on with my co-host, Amy Dutton. And I've got a little short snippet, Z compressed, to get the link of compressed FM. Have the clicks here. I'm not going to do any tracking stuff, so that'll be good. So let's do this, and then we'll create another one. And I'm going to have this be YouTube, show a short link to my YouTube, and I can get this from my text expander snippets as well. And I still won't use these UTMs. You can use them. I'm just kind of creating them to show you what information something like Bitly is already tracking for us. So there's a few different pieces of information that are tracked. Now, the one thing I want to add is a little bit of validation in terms of who can edit what, because what I don't want is someone to be able to come in and manually change these clicks unless they're an admin. So if we come into roles and permissions, you can see there's one administrator. And if we look at administrator, you can see in here, this is given to you by default, and it's going to have all permissions. So there's only one administrator user, that is me, as you can probably imagine. In your case, it's going to be the admin account that was used to create this thing. So I want to go into role, and I want to create a new role called contributor. So a contributor is going to have access to the app, but they won't have admin access. But we can go in and customize their access in the UI here, which is really, really neat. So you can say to be able to create a short link, yes, they can have access to creating a short link. They can have access to viewing short links. Yes. They can have access to maybe not have access to delete. You control that. You can control that yourself. And then for edit, I want to do a custom one because I only want admins to be able to change the clicks field. That way we don't spam it and cheat. So we can come down to field permissions and say that they have access to change all of these fields except for clicks. So this way we can make sure that clicks is read only for people that are not admins. Make sure it's not getting spammed and tricked. So I think this is really cool. This creating roles is super easy. Then customizing the roles and permissions is super easy as well. So let's actually switch over to our code now. We're going to use SvelteKit. And basically what we're going to do is create an API endpoint that is listening for an incoming request, taking the slug out of that request, going and grabbing the record out of Directus, figuring out what the associated URL is, incrementing the clicks property, and then redirecting the user in the right spot. So we're going to create a new SvelteKit project. If you're new to SvelteKit, I've done a few videos on SvelteKit on the channel, so check those out for more. Also, I'm working on a course called Everything Svelte, where we're going to use SvelteKit and Supabase and Stripe and some other cool technologies. So you can go and check that out. It's in a preview mode where we are releasing content now. So you can go and check it out at everythingsvelte.com if you're interested in learning more. All right, so inside of this directory, I'm going to create a new project, and we'll just call this link Shortener. So it'll go and get us started. It'll ask us some details of what we want to do. We will just do a skeleton project, so we're going to start from scratch. I'm going to use TypeScript. I'm a big fan of TypeScript. We'll do ESLint and prettier for formatting. No browser testing, and then we will open with code-r, so open in the same window, the link shortener app. If you're curious about the IntelliSense that I have inside of my terminal, which is really cool, it's from fig.io, so go and check that out. It's like really amazing. Okay, cool. So here is our new project, and inside of here, I can run an npm run dev. Oh, we need to install first. So we'll install our packages, then we'll run npm run dev, and we'll have everything we need. Now, two things we're going to need inside of environment variables. So I'm going to add a .env file here, and we'll go and grab these credentials. So we're going to need an API token for our admin user in Directus. Let's go back here. Let's go to settings. Actually, we'll be in the user directory. So we'll click on my admin user, james.q.quick@gmail. And we'll come down to a token, and we'll create a static token. So this is a token that's specifically assigned with this user, which is the admin. So we'll generate this token. You can copy this and try to steal it if you want to, but in my case, I'm going to delete this after the video, so I'm not worried about it. So I'm going to call this Directus API token. We'll paste this thing in there. And then the other thing we need is the actual URL for our deployed instance of Directus. So I'm going to call this Directus URL, and it's going to be https : and then that URL that we saw above. So it's actually going to be this part. So it's got the unique app ID in it, .directus.app, and it looks like it copied HTTPS, which is fine. So that full URL should look like this, where it's HTTPS, this unique identifier for the app, .directus.app. If you're self-hosting, if you're doing your own deployed, you'll have to get the version or get the URL yourself. So those are the two URLs that we're going to have. Now, SvelteKit has built-in support for public variables from environment variables, but we want these to only be run on the server and to be private. So we're going to install the .env package. So this is very common with Node frameworks, where we're going to install that package. It's going to take care of grabbing those environment variables out of .env and then making them accessible to us. So the other thing we're going to need is to install the Directus npm package, or the package from npm. So we can do npm install, and this is going to be at Directus/SDK. So this is installing the JavaScript SDK for Directus. And when we have that, I'm going to create a new folder, create a util folder, and then we'll create a Directus.ts. Now, this is not going to be super involved. It's just something that's going to initialize Directus for us. So we're going to import Directus from that package. So did that grab the quotes? Nope. So we'll grab that one. We're also going to import the .env/config. That's the .env package that we just installed. We have to make sure we import it before we try to use those variables. And then we'll get the Directus token. So Directus token equals process.env.Directus API token. So this is how we're accessing our environment variables, is at process.env. And we'll do almost the same thing for the Directus URL. So this is process.env.Directus URL, like so. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of a check in here. So let's do a check to say if there is no Directus token, we're going to throw a new error and say, please include a token in your environment variables. We'll do the same thing here for our Directus URL and say, please include a URL. So we could do a little bit better here on the error messages, but that'll work for now. And then lastly, we just want to export this configured Directus. So we'll export const Directus, and we'll say this is going to be a new Directus instance using the Directus URL, and then we're going to go ahead and set that token that we have in our environment variable. So we'll say auth, and then static token equals our Directus token. Cool. So that's all the configuration for this. I didn't mention this earlier, but there also is a link to the source code inside of the description below, so you can go and grab all the code there if you need to. So that's going to be our Directus piece here. And then inside of routes, we're going to create a dynamic route. So this is going to be prefaced as, or in brackets, slug dot. And then this is going to be a TS file because it's running as an API endpoint. So inside of here, we are going to export const get. And this is going to be an instance of a request handler. And this is going to be an async function. And we're going to destructure the params. We need to get the slug out of there. And then we'll just have this function here. All right, cool. I'm going to copy over. I created a little interface for our short link. So it has those same properties that we saw before, our click, slug, URL, and ID. You could also grab those UTM parameters if you want. Again, we just kind of threw them in there to show you that you could have them. All right, and then we want to import our Directus as well. So our instance of Directus is coming from the .util/Directus. So we'll import that thing to use here as well. All right, and then we want to get our actual slug. So we'll say slug equals params.slug, and we'll just log this out to make sure it's working. So console log slug. And then in the end, we'll return an object with a status of 200 in this case. We'll update this to be a redirect in a second. But let's just make sure this thing is actually working. So let's do npm run dev. This will start this up at localhost 5173. And if we enter, we should see the default index here. And then if we do a slash and do podcast, for example, see, it doesn't return any JSON data, which is okay, but this should have logged out the slug here. So this is what we're getting from the params. So notice that this property matches the name that's inside of the brackets of this file. So that's how we get dynamic routes inside of SvelteKit, is defining this with the brackets and then accessing that property in here. Now from there, we want to actually get the data associated from links that has the slug that matches that slug. So we're going to make a request. We'll destructure the data object that comes back from the directus.items. And the items is going to be link, and what did we call it? Short link, like that. And from that collection, we want to read by query. And then we're going to tell it what the query is, where we are going to filter based on the slug property. So this is saying we want to filter, only get records where the slug property of that record matches the slug that we passed in. This is actually the same as this, but with a modern JavaScript syntax. By just leaving it like this, it implies the key and the value are the same here. So if we don't get data, or if the data length is 0, so if we didn't get anything, or if there's no items, we'll just return back a status of 404. So this is letting the user know, hey, you tried to access something that we don't actually have that slug for. Otherwise, we can say the short link is the first item in the array, and we want to cast that to be an item or an instance of our interface up here. So our short link interface, this will give us some TypeScript help here. So we grab that, and then we want to query, we want to update the existing short link to increment the counts value. So we said that we've gotten a click to this thing before we redirect. We want to update the value. So we can await, we'll call Directus again, we'll call items again for short link, and we'll call update 1. We'll say we want to update the one with the ID that's coming from this record. And then we'll just take the clicks and we'll say this is going to come from shortlink.clicks plus 1. So we want to take the existing number of clicks and increment that by 1. And then lastly, if this all works, we want to return not a 200, but a status of 302, which is a redirect. And then where do we want to redirect to? Well, we're going to set the headers property to an object that has location, and then it has shortlink.url. So we grab the slug from the initial request. We use the slug to query the item in Directus inside of our dashboard. We see if we get it back. If we do, we assign it to something that looks like a short link, matching that interface. We update the existing clicks by 1, and then we redirect the user to the right spot. So fingers crossed that this actually works. So first off, if we type in something that doesn't exist, so if we type in just gibberish, this should return to us a 404, but in this case, it's actually giving us a 500. So we may need to double check all the credentials here. And I think what's going on is we didn't restart after we created our environment variable. So let's restart this thing. And then we'll try again. And actually, I think we may have forgotten to actually save the fact that we generated this token. So save button above to make sure that thing is saved. Now we can come back to our application and probably kill this and run it again. And that's logging out the credentials, added these logs for testing. So those are coming through correctly, and then I'm not seeing an error. So hopefully what we'll see is if we go back to our URL, if we come here with something that doesn't exist, then we will get if we look inside of our inspect and our network tab, we should see that this is getting back a 404. So that's exactly what we want. We can bump this up a little bit for visibility. And then if we type in compressed, or actually podcast, sorry, it should redirect to, it didn't actually do the redirect, unfortunately. So let's see inside of our slug. Looks like it didn't find anything based on the slug. So let's just log out here. Couldn't find that record, so we can double check. And I wonder if maybe I just entered the thing wrong. So, and let's log out the slug as well, just to make sure that's coming through okay. So let's refresh on /podcast. See, it's got podcast there, and we're saying we couldn't find the record. So we should be looking in the right place, the short link, and we're filtering by the slug. So let's go back to our data. And I actually did name this compressed. So this should have been podcast. So this is my fault. So let's rename this to compressed. Again, the benefit here of a headless CMS, super easy for me to go back in. And now I don't even need to do anything in the code because that thing has been changed in the backend. If I refresh this page, we should get redirected to the compressed FM site. Now, the other thing I want to check is if this short link property, the clicks property, has been updated. So I'm going to refresh this page and we should see that clicks here has been incremented by 1. Nice. If I go back, it may, and let's go to podcast again. This should redirect. Great. We can also go back and do the YouTube. So if we do YouTube here, this should redirect to my YouTube. Subscribe if you haven't already. All the standard things. And then if we come back into our data and refresh, then we should see that work as well. So 2 clicks for podcast and 2 for YouTube. Also, you get a lot of customization in terms of which one of these fields you want to see first. So we can reorder these to be slug URL. We could show all the UTM params if we want. We can resize these, etc. And this is based on per user. So it's actually going to save these preferences per user. So that when I come and look, I'm going to have my view and then other people can have their view as well, which is really, really cool. So we can also change the layout here if we wanted. It doesn't make sense as much for these, but we could do cards or Kanban boards, etc. These don't have images, so it's not really necessary. So I'm going to go back to just the basic table here, which works, but lots of customization options in there. And the last thing I want to show is if we create a new user. So let's create a new user to show that if you go into this, only the admin should be able to update clicks. So right now, I can just change this all willy-nilly. Only want admins to be able to do that. So let's add a new user. And this is going to be basically the same kind of thing. So me at jamesqquick.com. Will this generate a password for me? Let's just have LastPass generate a password. Cool. I'm going to copy this as well. I'm not going to save this account because I've got too many right now, but that's the password that I just copied to my clipboard. You can have avatar, where they are, title, description, tags, etc. in addition to adding their role. So in this case, we're going to add them as a contributor, not an admin. All right. And you can do a few different things, but that'll be enough for now. So we should have this new user, which is great. And now, if we come to log out on here, so we come to the log out button. Yes. Got to move that light around a little bit. And then we add our me at jamesqquick.com and paste in that password that we just created. We should be able to log in. Yes, loading in. Great. And then if we come in to edit, now you see I don't have access to edit the clips, or clicks. So between the roles and then their associated permissions, it's super easy to add users and add them in a way where they only have access to CRUD, create, read, update, and delete the things that you think they should have access to, while the admin can have access to do anything. So I hope you enjoyed the video. This was a lot of fun for me. I'm a huge fan of Directus. The dashboard and everything looks incredible. It's so, so nice. And we didn't even dive into if we customize a bunch of the different properties and things that we can add. There's so many options and it just looks really great. So I think it's really an amazing option for people that are curious. Go and check it out at Directus.io. Let me know what questions you have about this tutorial, and let me know if you'd like to see a deployed version of this. So we have our SvelteKit app that's just running locally. What if we actually deployed this to something like Netlify or Vercel? Let me know which one of those hosts you'd like to see a SvelteKit application deployed to, and we can do that on the channel as well. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one.